I'm Dr. Rachel Griffiths, and I'm with my father and partner in aquatics.
Dr. Tom Griffiths.
Welcome to the Drowning Files, where each week we share a lawsuit we've been involved in or another true story with suggestions to learn from these tragedies to save lives. What case do you have today?
This case is tragic. It involves a death by drowning, but it is atypical. It is unusual, and I doubt that any of our listeners have heard of this type of case. I was involved as an expert witness. The case was brought to me less than a year ago, and it just settled now so I can talk about it, although I have to keep it anonymous and confidential. And what we had in this case was a float tank, a sensory deprivation spa, which had float tanks. Now, float tanks are small vessels of water, and some of them have a canopy on top that would close in place. The room would be a small room with no lights, typically, no sound. Basically, the customer or the client is in a pool about the size of a hot tub or spa, but it's typically a rectangular type pool. Some have covers, some don't. And the water is loaded with salt, Epsom salt to be exact. And these spas, these deprivation tanks, sensory deprivation tanks, advertise all the benefits of floating on your back in these tanks for extended periods of time without any interruptions. And basically what they do is they put you in the tank and then they leave the room and close the door. There's no cameras, no windows, no nothing. And oh, by the way, you're naked as well. So the benefits listed for using a float tank are endless. Relaxation, reduced anxiety, reduced stress, increased ability to focus, attention and concentration, creativity, on and on and on. And in looking some of the websites, they actually point to research which proves that these benefits do in fact occur. I don't know. I haven't looked at the studies. I don't know if those benefits are valid or not. There was a young man, a young client in his 20s who had a history of problems, was abused illicit drugs and alcohol, was in and out of treatment centers, and thought it would be wise. I don't know if someone recommended it, but thought it would be wise that he would go into the sensory tank to help him out. So he signed up, he went into the tank, and he was supposed to be in there for an hour. An hour came and went, and the attendants, knew to open up the tank in an hour, and they couldn't get in because the door was locked. They banged on the door. There's no answer. They called for him, no response. And so the attendant went to get his boss and so forth. And now I don't think the door was locked. They were so concerned about privacy and not interrupting their clients. I believe he was worried that he would get in trouble if he intruded upon the person who was floating and being totally relaxed. And so he spent many, many minutes speaking to his boss and managers in the spa to decide whether or not they open up and check on him. So after lengthy discussion and hesitation, they eventually opened up the door, went in there, and of course, the victim wasn't floating on his back. He was face down floating in the Epsom salts. And rigor mortis had already set in. By the time they pulled him out of the tank, he was already stiff. And so the lawsuit was brought against the company and the site where they did this because they had absolutely no emergency plans put into place, because relaxation and privacy were the priorities of this float tank business. And because they said in their literature, and they truly believed, that you could not drown in this because your buoyancy was so great, it would keep your head above water. Well, we know that even in the Dead Sea, which is the saltiest sea on earth, you can drown there, because sometimes if you're a larger person and you're flat on your stomach, you can't lift your head up out of the water. You're unable to do that. So a case was brought against them because they had no drowning prevention strategies in place. There was no intercom in there. There was no cameras because they wanted privacy. There was no window. You just couldn't check. It was impossible to check on the person. So we don't know how long his face was underwater, but certainly it was a long time. And he did drown in that float tank. A lawsuit was brought against the facility, and the settlement was quick. I don't know what that settlement was. In this case, I think, in my opinion as an expert, there was a lot of negligence on the part of the owners of this float tank. But then again, there was a lot of responsibility on the shoulders of the individual who had a history of drug use and alcohol use. And I do not know if that was in his system. I don't know if they did an autopsy or not. But based upon his checkered past, his medical history, certainly there's what we call contributory negligence on his part. In other words, he contributed to his own demise. And basically that's it. And the message here is every body of water has to be somehow, some way guarded and protected, because you can drown in anything. But the question is, we don't know how he rolled over on his stomach, We don't know if he was
So do you think it's risky, even if you're not under the influence of anything?
Well, I think people have drowned in hot tubs after they fell asleep. And so I think the risk of falling asleep, fainting, and then aspirating water and then drowning, I think is a real possibility in these tanks. So there should be some type of drug and alcohol screening. I don't know if you can physically do that, but at least in writing. But also to stay face up. We don't know if this individual turned over on his stomach voluntarily to hold his breath with his face in the water, or did he have some type of seizure, or did he fall asleep and move in such a way that it caused him to roll over? So there has to be more precautions so that these people aren't totally left alone for 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes without some type of monitoring system that goes on. And certainly alcohol and drugs should not be a part of this experience.
That reminds me, though, sometimes prescribed medications can have that effect when you're in the water too. The float tank, did you say what temperature the float tank is?
I honestly don't know. I'm assuming it's warmer water, but I just don't know.
Okay. Do you want to talk about any other wellness trends that have become risky?
Well, to me, the riskiest, and I put health trends in quotes, is this whole breath holding thing, these breath holding challenges, these ice water, cold water breath holding things, the Wim Hof method, and so forth. We still see too much, and they seem to be growing, of these trends to reach nirvana by holding your breath underwater in a variety of situations. Now, things like yoga on paddleboard yoga. Well, that seems like a a different idea, but I do know of, I haven't served as an expert in this case, but I do know of one woman who was doing paddleboard yoga with a group of women as a part of a class, and she fell off her paddleboard in a river and drowned. So that yoga certainly is a significant wellness activity, but to do it on a paddleboard in the open water, not so sure that's the best way to reach wellness, unless, of course, you're wearing a Coast Guard approved life jacket.